In this episode of Oplev Salg, we explore how data platforms and retail media are changing sales. Today's guest is Serner, founder of REDAME and retail media specialist. Together with Michel from CVS, they explore how data and retail media are transforming sales roles, decision-making, and collaboration between brands and retailers. Retail media and content platforms are often presented in very broad terms. From your perspective, Anna, what is the concrete commercial problem retailers are trying to solve with these models?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we need to back a couple of steps before I start answering these questions. So let's start with just me introducing what retail media is. So retail media is essentially multi-brand retailers. So retailers selling products of others. That could, for example, be a grocery store or a fashion retailer selling products of others in their store. Then offering media space to their suppliers in their channels. To take an example, we can again look at the grocery store because that is a very good setting that a lot of us are used to. So think of the grocery store having a physical store and they have an e-commerce platform. And then they have a lot of suppliers. So we can take Coca-Cola, which is a very famous brand. They would like to reach the customers of the grocery store. So why not do it in the moment where they're actually shopping? So retail media would be that the grocery store are offering media exposure or media exposure possibilities in their channels. So let's say in the physical store, the grocery store have digital screens, and then they sell some of this space to Coca-Cola. That is a retail media placement. And now when we look at the commercial side and why it makes sense, we can also go some few steps back. So we have these two players. We have the retailer and we have the brand. So from the retailer side, they already have a lot of traffic. They have a lot of customers coming into the store or visiting their website or subscribing to their newsletter. This is highly valuable traffic because it's someone that is actually wanting to buy something. So if you're Coca-Cola, you really want to reach these consumers. And today they're paying a lot of money to reach these consumers in other channels, like Facebook or Google. But why not reach them where they actually shop? So from a commercial standpoint for the retailer, it would be to add a new revenue stream, starting selling media and media placement, but it would also be to strengthen the relationship with the supplier and coming closer to them. And from the brand side, it's really makes sense to reach the consumers where they actually are shopping. And on top of that, they usually also get access to data about the end consumer, because today it's sort of a black box. As a brand, you are selling to a multi-brand retailer and then you don't really know who's buying your product. But here it opens up for an opportunity for the retailer to share data to the brand. And if you look at the consumer side, they get more relevant ads presented to them. So actually it's a win-win-win solution.
Yeah, well, if I can respond to that, because it touches like with a lot of things that we also talk about like already for years, right, in marketing. So for instance, advertisement is not like a new phenomenon, right? So we already had, of course, retailers providing space, promotional space for like brands and suppliers of the goods and services. So in that sense, do you say that this retail media is more or only digital, or can you just explain that a little bit?
I would say what you're talking about is trade marketing. And as you say, it's been around for a long time. And how trade marketing is usually happening is once a year, they have these yearly negotiations with the retailer has it with their brands. And then they decide on how big of a volume am I purchasing from this brand. And on top of that, you also add like trade marketing contribution or like a marketing contribution. And that could be, for example, 1 million Danish kroner. And the retailer say, we will use this money to promote your products. But the brand doesn't really have any say in what these products are used for or money are used for. They're usually used for discounts. Could be, of course, promotional activities in the store. So I would say that retail media is amplifier of this, adding also the digital or data elements. But with that said, I don't think that you should only narrow it down to the digital products. So it could also be like a sampling event or a demo event space. So I would say like all the spaces you can sell where you have traffic, that could be a retail media product, part of your retail media offering. But it, of course, needs to work together with the trade marketing team. So you're not like, it's a lot of discussion about, is this just moving money from the trade marketing to the retail media? And like, this is nothing new, we're just gonna like move money. And I think that is a valid discussion, but I also think you should see it as a retailer as something that's working together. It's a way to get more trade money, if you want to call it trade money, or a way to make it more sophisticated, your offering.
And the real difference is that retailers now capitalize on their data, right?
Yeah.
The data that they collect.
Exactly. And make it a bit more sophisticated, the way that they sell media. So I think that this newspapers with offers that they have had for a long time, before they, a lot of retailers like offered half a page advertisement in our newspaper or promotional leaflet or what they call it. So that is a really good example of a retail media product. So retail media is nothing new. It's been there for a long time. But now it's just a bit more sophisticated, making it more like a media offering where you also utilize data, as you say, like how can we target better?
Yeah, interesting.
Michel, as data, platforms, and digital channels become more central, which part of the traditional sales role are becoming less relevant?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think that because of the data availability within companies, a lot of aspects change within organizations, right? So before we saw that organizations often were silos of functions that had to collaborate. And now because of data availability, we see that these functions are more integrated, right? So it's organizations also need to adapt to that kind of new reality. What becomes less important, I would say perhaps these pure negotiation elements where the example that you actually gave with trade marketing, that I think that becomes less of an issue or less relevant. Of course, it will still exist, but I think that it will be more like an ongoing kind of discussion between the different players, both within organizations and across the supply chain, and that the pure negotiation kind of skills, the hard selling, becomes less important. In that sense, it moves more to this kind of orchestration function. And that is because, well, there is more data availability. It is also used for better decision making, but it really depends on who has that kind of data and what they can do with that, right? So that shifts the kind of power dynamics, right? So the power balance within supply chains, and who has ownership of data can also utilize that, right? But I think that is not always happening, right?
No.
But maybe you can say a little bit more about
I would also say that it changes the sales role a bit to becoming more consultative.
Yeah.
So now when we have the data, we also need to know how to use it. And then it's more like the salesperson being a consultant to the brand. So if we take the grocery example again, so let's say that Coca-Cola has a mission to sell more. And the grocery store has a lot of data on selling. Then they need to consult Coca-Cola. Should they try to target people who bought Coca-Cola last month, or should they actually target people who bought sparkling water? Because that target group is more prone to change and to switch category. And that is something that they need to consult Coca-Cola in, because Coca-Cola don't know probably. Maybe Coca-Cola does, but smaller brands doesn't. So then the salesperson is more like a consultant.
Yeah.
and partnering with their brands to sell more together.
Yeah. Which is a shift that we see also in many other industries, right? So, and what then happens is that you're selling space to your supplier, right? So it's going in two directions, right? So they both sell something to each other. And of course, in this case, the retailer has the data and they can do recommendations or better recommendations, which then leads to this more consultative selling kind of approach. I think that is very interesting. And you also need different kind of skills for that. So, and if I just look at the literature, they talk about, for instance, dual agency, right? So then these salespeople, they act not only on behalf of their own company, but also need to act on behalf of like their customers, right? To whom they are selling. And that creates new kind of challenges. But I think the bottom line there is that they really need to move towards these kind of win-win situations.
And become more of becoming partners rather than a salesperson and a buyer.
Yeah.
Because as you also said, the one who's buying is also the one selling. So it goes both ways with the...
Yeah, they have this interdependency, right? And of course, they're always different brands that compete in the market. But I think that the one who has the data on customer behavior and what they like and how that is kind of changing, the kind of buying behavior, I think that is very valuable. The question is, how much are they actually utilizing that kind of data, right?
Exactly.
So, Anna, when companies try to build retail media or platform-based capabilities, where do you see real value being created and where do they typically struggle?
Yeah, so I would say the one that succeeds in this are the one that starts simple and then test a lot. So start with like one channel or product. It could be newsletter. So start offering banner ads in your newsletter. And then go out to your 2-3 biggest suppliers or suppliers that you have the best relationship and just ask them, like, if we're thinking of starting to offering this placement, would that be interesting for you? This is the price. And that is a very easy way to get started and also test it out with a no capital risk. Because often we think that when we're starting something up, we should go big or go home. So we make a lot of investments and then afterwards we might figure out that or understand that this wasn't anything that our suppliers wanted to buy. And the biggest problems, like one maybe not so obvious challenge, is the organizational structure of the retailers. So media sales is an old concept that a lot of companies have been doing, but those are media companies. Retailers are product companies. So you have the sales organization, they're selling products, they're super good in selling products. And then you have the marketing organization and they're super good in marketing the retailer and also spending money because that's their job. So where do you place media sales? Because that's an intersection between sales and marketing. So that is something that you need to figure out before starting this journey, or in the beginning at least. Like, are we creating a new department doing this, or should it be some kind of intersection, or how are we solving this organizational questions?
And do companies organize that in many different ways, or do you see kind of a dominant way of how they organize that?
I would say the most common way that I've seen is starting a new department. So what is happening in the big Danish retailers now is that they hire a person called head of retail media, and then that person has their own sort of department. It could lay under one of the other ones, but it's still like working in sort of a silo, maybe not in a silo, but like in their own department. And the next hires would be like key account managers. And another thing that is important to think about here is that media salespersons are all usually compensated by commission. And that is not a compensation model that you usually see at retailers. So you also need to figure out that compensation model, because if you want to hire good salespeople in this area, you probably need to be able to offer them commission.
Yeah. Which of course then is well, if they're not used to that, it's a whole different mindset that they need, right?
Exactly.
What I think is important there, if we talk about compensation systems and commissions and things like that, is it really that you need this kind of salespeople who are more commission driven, or because you could also argue like, okay, we just pay them more, like a higher fixed salary, right? And because you had talked about this consultative selling, so one could argue like, well, if you just pay them more, but like a fixed salary, that also would maybe be very attractive.
Yeah.
Or you need different types of salespeople, right? So
yeah, and I think that could also be an attractive model, but then it also becomes a discussion internally. Why are those selling media earning more than us selling the products?
yeah.
So at least I think it's a consideration you need to make, and how to like compensate, because it's media sales is like not cold calling, but sort of like at least you need to go out. It's very different from selling products in a store.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you look again at the research there's a lot of research on inside sales, which would be more like cold calling, call center agents, and then the field salespeople, which could be account managers, and normally they would have different compensation systems, right? So
exactly.
because they have a different job, different task, also different risk levels in that sense. But yeah, it's interesting to see how also within these companies that is shifting, right?
Yeah.
So
And if you also look at examples from other countries, so the UK market has come very far in retail media practices. There you can also see that they start completely new companies. So for example, Tesco has Tesco Media.
okay.
So they have like their own media company, which could also make sense because it's maybe not in the interest of the retailer to go from being a product company to a media company. But then you can start a new company connected to the core business.
But it suggests that they need a whole different set of competencies, but also maybe even a very different kind of strategic vision.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's difficult to align them, right? So then separating these organizations does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So if we move a little bit over to the research perspective, Michel, what does research tell us about how sales organizations should be designed when decision-making becomes more data-driven, but also more complex and less transparent? And what tends to go wrong in practice?
So if companies become more data-driven, I think that one assumption that is often made and taken for granted even is that data in and by itself leads to better decision making, which is not the case. Having more data doesn't mean that you will actually be able to make better decisions, because data availability and having a lot of data and analyzing that in a proper way is very, very difficult. Actually, I would say that the more data you have, the more difficult it becomes to make like a good decision, because there are so many even contrasting elements that you can pick up from the data that is not necessarily aligned, right? So I think that what companies need to be aware of is that if they have a lot of data, they need to have their own way of working with the data and using that to make more informed decisions. So that requires vision, that requires like having direction, kind of a strategy, a process of how they use the data and things like that. So there's, for instance, research on how in sales data is used. And there's also, there are a couple of cases on that. And we see from that kind of evidence that it's not so much about, for instance, how accurate these models are, right, that we use to analyze the data. It's more how people and companies use the data, for instance, to have a more broader discussion within the organization about, for instance, how to like use retail media, or in which channels to use it or not, or how to amplify traffic and all these things, right? So it's the discussion that actually between people and using the data as input that leads to more informed decision making. If they don't look at it in that way, but for instance say, well, we do the analysis and the data shows us this and this is the number and we need to go or like in this direction, or we have to make this decision, then often you see that the wrong decisions are made because there's no reflection, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that data is in that sense a complement. So it is complementary. It's to the whole decision-making process. It's input, but it's not reality, right? So people really need to like use their what we call private or local knowledge, their experience, to make sense of that data and the analysis and things like that. And I think if they do that, that already would help a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So they should not become like blind because of the idea that they think that the data tells them all. Right. But I'm not sure how you.
Yeah, but I see it exactly in the same way, and also that you need to think from a business perspective. I heard one retailer talking about, because they had like a screen by their cashier where they could, when you see what's been scanned in, you could also show some ads. And then they have ads for their internal campaigns, like get a croissant to your coffee. But they could also sell it to external companies, for example, to Mars or Snickers or whoever want to buy it. And then there were a discussion like, what are we earning most money on? Promoting our own products because we have a high margin on them, or getting the money from the media sales and then hopefully get some sales uplift also of that product. So that is also something you need to consider, like what consequences happen when you choose one thing or the other.
Yeah, and then of course you can analyze that or do some like experiments or like A/B testing or whatever. But you need to have that discussion before, during, and after, right?
Exactly.
So that,
and also have some sort of perception where you want to come. Like, what's our business vision and value?
Yeah, exactly. So that I think that is critical. Yeah.
So if we want to look a bit ahead, what do you think commercial leaders need to unlearn? And what do they need to learn much faster to succeed in the next couple of years?
I think they need to broaden their view of what value they're offering. So if you're a product company, you also offer value in your traffic. And selling traffic is something that a lot of companies have been doing for a lot of time. But how can we take that concept into a new context? So that is something you need to unlearn and learn again. Like how to find value, or how to define the value you have.
No, and we also have seen that in other industries and still are witnessing that, right? For instance, in the banking environment, right? So they have a lot of transactional data, but they actually are still not able to really utilize that data, partly because of privacy-related issues. But I think that new legislation around that also forces them more to utilize that kind of data. And we see the same here actually within the retail environment, where there's so much behavioral data. And then, of course, you can do all kinds of analysis on price elasticity, which categories are more important or not, and how that's changing private labels versus like A labels, or other kinds of elements can be analyzed. But I think it's really about creating a competency in utilizing this data beyond that kind of more like current focus that they have, but really think outside of the box, right? To think in new types of business models. And I think that is exactly what you're referring to with regards to them thinking about how to use retail media as a new kind of business model.
And how do we partner with our suppliers and work together with them? I also think like try fast and fail fast is a good thing to learn. Like, you need to be very fast moving because the world is so rapidly changing. So build up that like testing functionality, which can be difficult in a big organization, but do like A/B testing and build up an environment where it's okay to fail, but also that people there is to test things.
Yeah, well, and there you see that companies like Amazon, they from the start like of this organization, they had this philosophy: every day is day one, right?
Yeah.
So, and that really is about exactly this point: being entrepreneurial, try to test and see what works and what not. Exactly because we are in this increasingly complex and dynamic environment, and then you can like have a very rational kind of long process where you analyze and reflect, but then before you're at the end of that process, your competitors will already have moved beyond that, right? And the environment already has changed. So that I think is a very important part.
And also interesting that you mentioned Amazon. They're also very, very strong in retail media. And I think last year they were predicted to earn $60 billion in their media business, which also creates new questions about like, okay, so if Amazon, one of the biggest resellers in the world, don't need to earn money on their products, how can other web shop that earns money on their products compete?
Yeah.
It will be impossible. So then it also becomes like a necessity to also build up the media business if you want to still be in business as a retailer.
Exactly. Very important.
And to wrap up, what is one concrete action a commercial team can take tomorrow to perform better in a more platform-driven market?
I would say look at what you have and start monetizing it. So start with the example we had before with the newsletter. Start with one concrete placement and then see if you can monetize it.
Yeah, and also reiterating what we talked about before, test multiple things, right? Not maybe in parallel, but sequentially. Try to get this kind of experimental environment within your organization where it's also okay to fail, right? Where it's allowed to fail, where people are not like punished for that or have the feeling that they're punished for that, but really to see what kind of opportunities are out there. And I think that is very important.
And also with that test environment set up like if this experiment succeeds, we have achieved this. If it fails, we achieve this.
Yeah.
So you know what the test criteria are. Like very academical, but not this long article experiment. But
no, but you need some structure there.
Yeah, because otherwise it's really difficult to know if you succeeded or not.
Exactly.